When I brought the model to Nashville, I said I wanted to make sure that families weren't learning about financial literacy as an afterthought or only after they had academics mastered, but that it was treated as core from the beginning. Create a curriculum that started with personal finance in middle school, but then by high school was really focused on business finance. So we were able to actually teach students about business ethics and debt and equity structures. And I was really proud of that work because I could see how students were really, their minds were just opening to how capital flows, how decisions are made, what it actually means to take an idea from napkin to practice and to building a company and all the financing structures that are necessary to do it. And it helped not just the students, but their families also think about their relationship to finances very differently as well.
That's the voice of Mia Howard, the managing partner of innovative schools at New School Venture Fund and founder of Intrepid College Prep, a network of free public schools in Southeast Nashville. With a background in finance and law, she brought her unique set of experiences to her work at New School Venture Fund, having served as a school founder and director of school and talent at the Opportunity Trust in St. Louis. In her work with New School Venture Fund, she's able to explore and invest in innovative new school models across the country. Her founding legacy, Intrepid College Prep, continues to serve families in Southeast Nashville with a deep emphasis on strong academics, high expectations, parent engagement, and college preparation. My name is Scott Campbell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nashville Incubator, and you're listening to Back to the Whiteboard, a podcast featuring conversations with innovative leaders in the education reform space. You can learn more about the Nashville Incubator and get involved at tnincubator.org. Mia, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to just chat with you because you're one of the first founders. You founded a school here in Nashville, kind of the early days of sort of the charter movement in this city. And now you're doing some really exciting and fun stuff kind of across the country. So look forward to the conversation, and thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So let's start with Intrepid. So you founded Intrepid in 2013. And I'd just love to hear a little bit about what problem you were trying to solve when you decided to open up a school here in Nashville.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the Nashville charter ecosystem at the time was nascent. There were new school options that were coming to East Nashville and North Nashville, both historically marginalized communities, but gentrification patterns and population shifts saw low-income families moving further south to Antioch, and I wanted to make sure that there were strong school options, typically starting in middle school, which is when parents start to get nervous about their school options, and making sure that there was a seamless pathway all the way to college admission.
Love it. And so Intrepid is a 512 school. What else, other than being like a really high quality school option for families in like Southeast Nashville, what made the model that you created innovative?
Yeah, I think a few things. I mean, one was I knew academic preparation was important, but we also wanted to make sure school was a place where life preparation was happening. And in order to do that, we really wanted to make sure families were at the table from the beginning. You know, there's often a myth that low-income families cannot or struggle to be involved in their children's education, but oftentimes they just need different supports to access strong communication with teachers, being able to check for homework completion, and just being able to monitor progress before grading periods end. And so we had a model that really was working alongside families to help them create the structures at home to monitor and support academic progress and character development. And then we also wanted to make sure we were also redefining who college is for. So not presupposing that families furthest from opportunity can't access those options either academically or financially, but then working with families to help them prepare for college as well.
Yeah. One thing I've always loved about Intrepid is that sort of financial literacy aspect of it. And can you talk more about how that was woven through all the way from fifth grade through when students are actually graduating and then attending college? And you've had how many classes now? 3 or 4 classes that are actually in, and you have college graduates as well.
Exactly. So it's always important to name where this inspiration came from. So I actually worked at Lehman Brothers until it collapsed in 2008, and was myself a young, early career professional, really just struck by how the housing crisis had really decimated the potential for families to have a strong foundation in the early aughts. And so when I brought the model to Nashville, I said I wanted to make sure that families weren't learning about financial literacy as an afterthought or only after they had quote unquote core academics mastered, but that it was treated as core from the beginning. And Tennessee at the time was one of the few states that actually had actually promulgated K through 12 financial literacy standards. There wasn't a lot of enforcement around it, but it did give me a framework to start from. And so that actually made it pretty easy to then create a curriculum that started with personal finance in middle school. But then by high school, it was really focused on business finance. And I had a professor at Wharton who helped me create developmentally appropriate version of the freshman year syllabus at Wharton and adjust it to a high school scope and sequence. And so we were able to actually teach students about business ethics and debt and equity structures. And I was really proud of that work because I could see how students were really, their minds were just opening to how capital flows, how decisions are made, what it actually means to take an idea from napkin to practice and to building a company and all the financing structures that are necessary to do it. And it helped not just the students, but their families also think about their relationship to finances very differently as well.
I love it. Like, so obviously, like, your personal experience having worked in the financial sector was like a big sort of inspiration around this. Like, what else or who else or whatever you read that was like sort of really kind of core behind inspiring you to build this model?
Yeah, I would say I remember starting out again as an early career professional, and I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is like one of those like seminal financial self-help books that kind of does a lot of myth busting around how to set up your finances in a way where you're also investing in yourself and not just always paying creditors first and things like that. And I grew up in a family where my parents both were college educated, had really stable careers. But when I applied for college, I remember being stunned that they didn't have savings for college after years and years of telling me, like, you know, college isn't necessary, you know, putting me through all these rigorous programs. And then when it came time to start mapping that out more concretely, they were like, you're going to have to get a scholarship because we have no money set aside for you. And thankfully, again, I was academically gifted, so I was able to find scholarships and I got a full tuition ride to Vanderbilt. But it was really an eye-opening moment of how I had just blindly trusted that this would all just kind of figure itself out. And then to get brought into this shocking reality, like, no, like college has a cost and you have to be talking about that early and often and setting aside resources for it, inspired me to create a school where we were talking with families about those barriers and opportunities from the very beginning. We created a 529 college savings program with College Backer that provided matching incentives for families when they met certain milestones at the school. And it was a way for us to say, we're not asking you to do anything that we're not going to partner with you in ourselves. And so, like, we're making an investment, financial investment in your children alongside you. And it was really inspiring to see families turn out in droves for those, you know, interest sessions and the sort of like college financing 101 sessions long before the FAFSA was due.
So important. Now, not to bury the lead, but, you know, you left and are doing a lot of really fun, exciting, and kind of important things in this space across the country now. But the school persists and is doing great. And you have, you know, students who have actually graduated from college now and you have multiple classes. And so how would you say, like, your dream and your vision really has played out?
Yeah, I would say I'm really proud of the legacy that the community has built around Intrepid. It was big, it was always bigger than me, and it still is bigger than me. And, you know, leaving after 8 years was hard, but I knew when I left that community would continue to make sure that Intrepid would deliver on its mission. And that's been true. So to your point, we have our first class of high school graduates that are now seniors in college. 2 went on to Vanderbilt University, which is my alma mater, which was great to see. And, you know, we now have a really robust college planning program there that's really about matching students to the best right university that matches their skills, interests, financial needs, et cetera. And I would say I'm really proud of the way that the community has continued to focus on that, both before and coming out of the pandemic. I know a lot of families had to rethink what college was going to look like in those early years in the pandemic. And so it required just a lot of like adaptability and flexibility and learning alongside and with parents to help them make choices alongside their children about where they wanted to continue their education.
I love it. So let's move on to think about some of the fun stuff that you get to do now. So you currently work for New Schools Venture Fund, and you get to see and invest in really innovative and new school models across the country. And I'd love to just hear, you know, some perspective about, you know, what is it that you do, but also, like, what are you really excited about right now? What are some things that you're seeing in kind of innovation that you're like, oh, you know, this is it. This is what we need in our country right now.
Yeah, there's a few things. So yes, as you mentioned, I have been at New Schools for a little over 3 years, and I am a managing partner over our Innovative Schools portfolio, which means that I went from being a founder to now investing in founders, which has been a really fulfilling evolution in my career. I was able to attribute a lot of the success I had at Intrepid to early investments that were made in my leadership. And I believe deeply in the philanthropic sector's commitment to supporting founders to be successful on their entrepreneurial journey. What I'm excited to see is models that are continuing to redefine what excellence looks like for students, both not only in the outcomes of the schooling experience, but really valuing and measuring the quality of the schooling experience itself and valuing how students experience school, whether it's through surveys that calibrate on teacher-student relationships and how students are feeling safe or a sense of belonging, all the way through the extent to which school is preparing them academically for a rigorous range of options when they graduate. And what I'm really inspired by are the schools that are reimagining the role of educators in this moment. I know we want to move on from talking about the pandemic, but it really was a moment in which everyone had to renegotiate what their relationship was to work and family, and teachers and principals never got a break, right? And so what we still now have are teachers and principals that are working in systems where they aren't always feeling adequately supported, where they don't feel like their long-term career trajectories are matched with resources that value their contributions to the profession. And so we see a lot of the schools in our portfolio wanting to reimagine the role of educators and reimagine the value proposition of teaching, whether it's reimagining compensation systems, restructuring the role itself, whether it's introducing sabbatical structures that really help educators see teaching as a pathway they can do for a long time, broken up with appropriate breaks. And then I'm also looking forward to seeing more models that shift to make schools more accountable to families themselves. There's a lot of talk about, proficiency rates and growth rates, and those are all really important. But if families don't understand that information and what it means about the quality of their school system, then we're not yet doing what the school systems need to do. And so I'm really a fan of the schools that are really thinking intentionally about how to translate the learning into a digestible set of understandings about what their students and kids know and understand, and are making that accessible to caregivers so that they can support their students at home as well. And then the last thing we're seeing that I'm really excited about are schools as community infrastructure. Again, I think in the pandemic, we learned that schools have always been serving a purpose beyond just core academic learning. They've been real resource hubs. And so I've seen schools really lean into that, not in a way that's unsustainable by trying to be everything for community, but by really reaching out and making sure that the resources in the community are accessible to students. And so not making school a broader mandate than being committed to the teaching and learning, but having strong partnerships with other partners, whether it be food banks or, counseling services or financial planning resources, credit unions that are coming in and partnering with families around a host of needs. And I see that that's really going to not just make brilliant students, but brilliant and resilient communities.
I want to break this down because you covered three things, and I want to talk about each of them and get a little granular with you around it, because I'd love to hear some specific examples. So the first one you talked about is, obviously like those who are rethinking what the role of a teacher looks like, and there's obviously compensation structures, and you talked about sabbatical, which is really exciting to hear that's sort of shifting into the education space. But you also just talked about rethinking the role of a teacher to some degree, and I'd love to hear examples of, some schools or models out there that are really rethinking what it looks like to be a teacher in a classroom.
Yeah, so one is, I think, just recognizing that teachers are whole humans and they also experience school, with all of the stress and challenge it can bring. And so I've been really proud of the work that Digital Pioneers is doing in DC, where they don't just think about the supports that are needed for students to thrive, but they're also thinking about the supports that educators need to thrive. And so they provide counseling services to staff on site, and they really make sure that there's a continuum of care, to make sure that students are showing up and staff are showing up mentally and physically healthy. I would say, I would also mention intrinsic schools as the example of a school that is thinking about how to create the structures that invite teachers to stay in the profession long term with sabbatical invitations after a period of service. And you could always imagine that that could be really expensive because then you have to think about the substitute teaching force that's needed to support the sabbatical workforce. But they were thinking creatively about how to do that by having students also learn in pods. So classrooms have up to 60 students through a rotating series of stations and technology. And then there's, a lot more flexibility with the number of adults that are in the room. And they also try to make sure that technology is wisely used as a supplement to support quality instruction as well, which then gives them some more flexibility in being able to offer those sabbatical structures too.
That's really interesting. I think this is so often, and obviously the pandemic probably brought this to light, but we sort of forget this idea that great learning comes with great teaching. And you have to have teachers who are willing to say, this is it. This is my career, right? This is it, and I'm going to stay here. I'm going to continue to do this. And I think we could all probably think back on those maybe 30-year educators who we had in the classroom. But I think when we look at our schools today, we're seeing a lot of the folks are saying, yeah, I don't know. This is probably not the long-term picture for me.
Yeah.
So I just I think that's so fascinating to think about some of the ways that people are approaching how do we build compensation structures, break structures, classroom structures in a different way to really put front and center that our students are not going to learn, our children are not going to learn if we're not putting great teachers who are excited about and understand their content and understand how to really educate young people.
Yeah, and I think people are often curious when I start these conversations talking about things like sabbatical, which signals rest or at least pausing and reflecting. And it sounds like it's a approach that might be at odds with rigor and supporting students to have all the right resources and all the right people in the building. But if we were really honest about the ways in which curriculum standards across the country have gotten more rigorous over the last decade, which is a good thing, and that the work of internalizing standards and being able to teach to them with a level of expertise is a craft that takes time to develop, then we also need accountability systems that are thinking about the long-term excellence of a system. And to this day, most states report out progress annually, which invites schools to think about progress in 1-year cycles, where it's just go all in. And if you burn out your teachers, okay, at least we, hit these academic benchmarks. But if we were really holding schools accountable to long-term academic achievement, long-term teacher sustainability, those two things would put more things in tension with the way things are today in terms of the status quo. And we'd have to grapple more with, are we actually providing the right resourcing around schools, the right per pupil funding around schools to make teaching an attractive profession that attracts people that are willing to build their craft over a long period of time and don't get burnt out in the first 3 years.
I love it. I'm going to shift to talking about community and family engagement because that was so sort of core to the work that you did at Intrepid from the beginning. And now you're seeing other schools across the country who are approaching what that looks like in a very different way. So what's, one or two examples of things that you're seeing out there that are really thinking about what do families want? How do we engage with them? How do we make them part of the process of the everyday education of their children?
Yeah, so one thing I think it's important to name is there was an old way of charter schools launching and being developed, and there's a new way of charter schools launching and being developed. I came up in the work in the old tradition, which was finding a unicorn founder who sometimes wasn't even part of the community where they were building the school, but they had seen some things and were inspired to create a new school, and then they were bringing families along. And so that was my story of my introduction to Nashville. I was a transplant. Yes, I had went to college there, but I came into the Antioch community, not of the community. I built authentic relationships, but I also came to the community and said, we have a problem. The schools here are terrible. Guess what? This school that doesn't yet exist is going to be better than anything you've ever seen. And you should just trust me and come along on the journey. And the impetus for the financial literacy focus, the character education focus, the college prep focus were things that I brought to the table based on what I had seen successful in other communities. But it was only after the school launched that there was really an opportunity for school community members, parents, and students to shape what the school would look like. And today we recognize that that's an approach of doing to and not with. And now we see a lot more families being engaged at the earliest stages of community school design, to say school design is not a founder-led process. It's a community-facilitated process. And ultimately, the founder should really be taking the best of the training and research and expertise that they're bringing to the table, but allow themselves to be molded and shaped by community will, aspirations, the needs of the community, and then seed and share power, ultimately, to make sure that the school is representing a mission that families and community members really believe is what's necessary for the community to prosper for generations to come. So that's changed what school design looks like. And then I would say where we have not yet seen enough shift is then what does it look like to then sustain those structures over time? So we see that parents are often very involved in the design of a school, but then for all manner of real challenges around time and prioritization and resourcing, oftentimes it can revert back to transactional family engagement.
Yep.
When the school's up and running. And so we're really proud of models like BRIC, which is a charter school network in Buffalo and New York and New Jersey that has thought through how do we make sure that our relationship to community is thinking through how communities and families access all that they need to create strong, healthy lives for their children. So they have access to health clinics, and they have access to, like I said before, like credit and financial counseling. They have access to food pantries. They really are thinking about how do we connect families to make sure that we are a resource hub for how to navigate a broader community of resources versus being the food pantry itself, the school being the financial counselor themselves. They've thought through how to just leverage community resources really effectively. And we're excited to see models like that scale that are thinking about how to build healthy communities that are comprised of healthy schools versus healthy schools existing in communities that otherwise don't have robust infrastructure.
I love it. I'm so grateful that you sort of brought up those two things, right? Because I think in the work that I'm grateful to get to do on a regular basis is work with, innovative founders and ideas. And sometimes it's really easy to lean heavily on this unicorn founder viewpoint to that, we have the answers for the community and that they get to respond to what we've already built and done and rather than thinking about how from the beginning do we purposefully put together schools that are meeting very specific needs of that community. And the second point that you brought up, it reminds me of a grad school book I read about the core of three strands, like how do we engage families in really meaningful ways and lean on their expertise as you're actually running a school, right, on a day-to-day. And if they don't feel comfortable getting up and teaching or leading or speaking, almost all parents feel comfortable at least being present at some point in time, right? Whether that's just sitting in the back of the room or going to work with an individual student one-on-one. There's so many really small little ways that we can sort of bring families back in. And I just, this is really exciting. And to think about how obviously the pandemic was a terrible time for our country and our world. And in some ways, these opportunities that we're now seeing, it's sort of brought to the light into our structures to say, okay, we can do things a little bit differently here.
Absolutely.
And you sort of alluded to previously, how schools are thinking about how to engage with community partners in different ways. And I love that one of the easy ways is to actually have services that are available to parents as well as to students. And we've seen this, sort of wraparound services. Yeah, I think the ebbs and flows of it, and it's expensive and it's hard for schools to think about how do I serve all the needs of my students, right? In the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how do I make sure every single need is met? But I love this approach of thinking about how community partners, can step in and work together hand in hand with schools. Are there any one or two examples of schools that you're seeing really, really, strong partnerships with community partners that are serving both students and families in a unique way?
Yeah, so I definitely want to still go back to that BRIC example I mentioned there in Newark and Buffalo. I would definitely encourage you to check those schools out because, like I said, they are really thinking about birth to 8 experiences. And so they've set up programming where community members can become doulas, which helps then students enrolled at BRIC and their families, if their families are still expecting, children, go through a maternal care process that is really about supporting the student from the very beginning. They have partnerships that are thinking about economic mobility as a core part of how families are supported in navigating career opportunities in the region. And again, I've seen schools have an aspiration to do that work, but then they think that they have to do it themselves, and they try to be more than a school. And BRIC at its core is a network of schools leveraging community partnerships and collaborative grant opportunities to share resources, to build the infrastructure to make accessing those resources more seamless for families, which I think is a great way to approach it without overwhelming the system or putting more on teachers and staff. And so I would just continue to plug that approach. And then I would say there's a number of rural collaboratives that are coming about, which are meant to address the resource gaps that are experienced in rural communities when it comes to accessing quality education. And in particular, as rural communities are navigating changes to infrastructure and career opportunities in manufacturing, et cetera, we're seeing a real brain drain in some of those communities. And so communities are saying, okay, well, then how do we partner together across 3 districts, for example, to create a career technical hub where students can get work-based learning opportunities, get connected to career pathways across a broader range of industries, across neighboring communities, and really creating then centralized physical plant for where those career and tech hubs can exist, where community partners or career partners are both like creating coursework that happens in that building, but also then creating transportation, systems that allow students to also go into actual physical sites for career partners to do on-site work as well. And we're seeing that both increase the amount of career-connected learning that students are able to experience, but also more coordination between communities around long-term economic mobility plays to make sure that they have a pipeline into their most in-demand and high-need careers.
That's so smart. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about urban education environments and reforms, and the charter movement has been really strong in that. But there's a lot of need in reforms that you're starting to see across the country in more rural environments, as you talk about, whether it's charter or just districts thinking differently about how they're doing that work. And I think that's so important, that the reforms really hit every part of our country and all these communities.
Absolutely.
Well, this was so fun to be able to talk with someone who's sort of seeing the whole ecosystem across the country. If there's resources or information that people want to find out more about this, or they want to start exploring different models in this country, where would you suggest that people go check out, or books or websites or resources that might be helpful to them?
Yeah, so we spent much of 2024 working on a project in collaboration with Bellwether called Building Better Schools, which allowed us to go into schools that were launched with new school support over the last decade and to understand between when they came to us with their bold idea and many years down the line into implementation, what were we actually seeing in terms of the range of innovative models in the portfolio. And so I would definitely encourage folks to check out that report, Building Better Schools, because it includes not only really detailed case studies of bright spots across a range of contexts, district and charter schools, through the K-12 spectrum, but it also has a really helpful catalog of innovative practices that can be a starting point for new school designers that want to work with their community to determine what set of innovative approaches the community needs to meet, long and short-term community aspirations. And so we just definitely point folks to that resource. And then I would also say, as we think about what it means to build together, the book Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown continues to be an inspiration to me around what we think about as scale. So it's really clear that things at the large scale replicate things at the small scale. And so we shouldn't be afraid to start small, which in the charter context has been something that's always been embraced with the launch and support of single-site charter schools. And in this era where we see declining enrollment in certain contexts, and we see real concerns about the economic viability of districts and communities and public schooling, there's been a question of do we still need new single-site schools? And the answer is yes, because it's the easiest place to start new, perfect new ideas, and then scale them to grow.
Well, thank you. Thanks for your time. Thank you for your commitment to families and young people in our community here in Nashville and the legacy that you've left, as well as continue to do that work around the country.
Yeah, well, Nashville will always be my second home, and it was great to reconnect with you, Scott.
Great to spend some time with you. Thanks, Mia. Thanks for listening to Back to the Whiteboard, powered by the Nashville Incubator. Learn how you can get involved in helping us reform education at tnincubator.org. And if you like this episode, please follow, rate, and review this show wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.